Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 32, exploring the humanity of deity and gender, with our guest via Skype, P. Sufenas Virius Lupus. Hey Lupus, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
Excellent. Well, could you introduce yourself and talk about a little bit about what you do and who you are?
Sure. So my full name for this particular context, as I have many names, is P. Sufenas Virius Lupus. I am the doctor, a Sacerdos, a Mystagogos, and the Magistratum of the Ekklesía Antínoou. And that is a queer Graeco-Roman-Egyptian syncretist reconstructionist polytheist group dedicated to Antinous, the deified lover of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, and related divine figures. And I've been practicing in and building that tradition for about the last almost 13 years. And so I do that. I also do some Celtic Reconstructionist methodology employing, and I feel the need to kind of put that caveat in there because Reconstructionism isn't a religion, it's a methodology. I think that's something that a lot of people miss.
Right.
So I use that methodology on Celtic materials and other materials, and practice within a couple of Irish-related traditions for that. And being a kind of dyed-in-the-wool polytheist, I'm fascinated by deities wherever they're found, and a number of them in a number of different traditions and so forth have come into my practices over the years. So I'm involved in lots of different things. I attend the local Shinto shrine here. We're very lucky to have one of the only recognized Shinto shrines in North America, just about 60 miles away or so. So I do all sorts of things, but I'm mainly known for the Ekklesía Antínoou, for Antinoan practice, for my blog, which is called Edicula Antinoi, and then for number of books that I've written and poetry and things like that. So yeah, that's sort of me in somewhat brief. I should probably also mention that I'm a metagender person, which means that I am of a non-binary gender identity. I always say it's the 3rd, 5th, or 37th option for gender. The more the better. So that's an important part of my general identity, but also specifically of my spiritual identity. And I see it as kind of integral to the spiritual role that I functioned in so far in a lot of different contexts. So yeah, that's kind of the long, short version.
Yeah, actually, we met around gender issues because I think we met you when we were doing our causing trouble around gender issues
Yes.
back in 2011. Yeah, it was 2011. Yep. And I just remember we had an amazing conversation, although I can't remember all the details of it. And and you were wearing the fez, this awesome fez.
Yep. I'm wearing it right now, actually.
Fabulous. No, I have to admit that I always remember you as the fez guy.
Yeah. Yep.
But one of the things that happened, I think it was the year afterwards. We did our big talking stick conversation, but
Yes.
I don't remember if that was the year or the year after. You did this amazing ritual with the tetrad and transgender deities.
Yes, that was 2013. Yeah.
And it was so beautiful. And, it really inspired a lot of people. It inspired me, but it also, it also really touched one of my coven mates, Connie. And I think she's helping you with a ritual at some point.
Yes. I've been chatting with her a lot, and for some reason, I can't remember what she looks like. So I'm going to be really curious in a couple of days to see her again, and I'm sure it'll jog my memory then. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that ritual, I think, you know, every ritual that you do, there are very few of them that I've ever done have been just kind of ho hum, it's another ritual.
Right.
And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because that means I don't get to do ritual as often as I'd like. If I had done it as often as I'd like, then it would be kind of ho hum. Mm-hmm. But that particular one stands out for so many different reasons as just one of the best rituals that I've ever been a part of. Part of it was because we actually succeeded in doing what we wanted to do with it, and the people who came to it seemed to receive it very well. But one of the aspects of it that was pretty unexpected and yet not entirely, when it happened, we knew what it was that happened, is that in the process of that ritual, a sixth member of the tetrad group was born. Mm-hmm. And that was amazing. And when we kind of did a little bit of a huddle at the end of the ritual after we were cleaning up and we were about to leave the room, there was just suddenly this presence there. And it was as if having that ritual unlocked that last piece, or at least the last piece for now. Mm-hmm. And so I had that feeling very much. I didn't get to talk with the other ritualists immediately afterwards, but then an hour later, I met up with one of them, and he said, you do realize there's another one now? And I said, yes, I do. And then the following day, one of the other ritualists had dreamt of the new person in the tetrad and gave me all these details that kind of confirmed what we had all suspected. So it was something that not only did what we wanted it to do, honored the deities that we wanted it to honor, served the community that came to it, and also did this thing which I think we ought to be seeing more and more of now, which is discovering further deities and discovering further dimensions to deities and discovering further types of divine being. Because when you have a religious system that's animist or polytheist, that kind of stuff should happen all the time. And this kind of notion, this is one of the things that bothers me about some sections, not only of polytheism, but also wider paganism, the notion that there's a closed canon of deities. And that just seems strange to me, because deities, if nothing else, are quite promiscuous. Mm-hmm. In all of the good and bad ways that can be understood. And so there should be new epiphanies, new theophanies all the time. Maybe not every second or anything like that, but on a regular basis. And it just doesn't seem that people are very suspicious and dismissive of that, I think, which is unfortunate. So anyway.
No, I agree with you, because, you know, we've done some similar things. You know, we created elemental demons, actually, that, mm-hmm. you know, we call in as part of calling in the elements. And,
right.
And, you know, and I was talking to Jennifer and Gavin Bone, and they were also talking a lot about, you know, we have to let the traditions evolve. And yes. I think creating new deity, I think, is part of that.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, I mean, and this is one of the things about the tetrad group, and I always try and clarify this for people, because they say, well, they're made up deities. And it doesn't seem to me that it's that way, because the only part about them that's really made up is their names. Each of them has come forward and asserted themselves as individual beings. And the negotiation process was, okay, is this name a name that you would be comfortable going by? with the wider community so that you can be known as this, prayed to as this, and called by this name. And then it's like, well, yes, that's fine with us, you know. But as far as, you know, a notion that, you know, kind of just a bunch of us sat down, or even just one of us sat down and said, I think there needs to be some new deities, and here they are, and, you know, draw up kind of a chart or something. You know, right. I mean, or, you know, that there's like this new deity character sheet from a role-playing game or something. Right. You know, I mean, that's an interesting idea, I suppose, but that's not how it works. There was a perceivable spiritual presence and reality behind these things that we then just named. And, you know, that kind of process, I think, is one that we don't have a lot of precedent for, even though it happened all the time in the ancient world. But they never wrote down for us, this is how you do it, or anything like that. I've been lucky enough to have some of these things confirmed by independent diviners who knew nothing of it and were told nothing of it, and then came back with information that was like, well, we can't take that as anything other than confirmation of this.
Well, I mean, let me give you another confirmation, I suppose, is actually after going back to our suite after that particular ritual, one of them followed me and decided to talk to other people through me.
Wow.
And it was really fascinating because the sense of self of that deity, and I feel bad because I cannot remember for the life of me which one it was.
Right.
But I want to say maybe Polydeukion, but, and I'm probably murdering the name too, but
well, Polydeukion is one of their parents. Definitely.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, he's part of hero cultus and so forth, and he's very important in it because in their kind of the myth of their birth, him, Antinous, and Favorinus of Arles are kind of the three that come up with it. Mm-hmm. The idea of, okay, these new deities need to be born. And, you know, that's a myth written after they were actually born. The cultus of Antinous shades into that of Polydeukion, and working with them over these years, it was very clear that they were supportive of gender diversity, but because they didn't represent it themselves, they kind of went, look, we're happy to be deities who are allies to gender diverse people, but you know, and this is something that people don't often quite realize either. There had been times in the Ekklesía and other Antinoan groups where people said, well, can we come up with a transgender version of Antinous so that trans people will like him? Mm. And I said, well, that's an interesting idea, but there's kind of a problem. Trans people face difficulty in their life because people want them to be a gender that is different than what they actually are. And they're often forced to conform to whatever the gender is that they were assigned at birth. And that's a bad thing. And so likewise, why would you want to try and force a deity to be a gender that they're not? Because Antinous is lots of things, but one of the things that he is he's male. Right. And to kind of say, you know what, you need to drag it up a little bit so that other people will be comfortable. You know, he's like, well, are we doing a rite of Dionysus here? Because if we are, hey, that's the name of the game, and I'm fine with that. But if you're talking about, you know, going in for the operation, so to speak, no, I'm sorry, that's not my department. And so they have evinced this interest in it, and they were very kind of early adopters of gender variance acceptance and so forth, at least in my own experience with deities. And so that they were the ones who kind of then stepped forward and said, hey, we're some of the parents. And then this whole pile of other deities, strangely enough, and this was not remotely planned or envisioned, but it turned out to be 78 deities.
Wow.
And that is, of course, an interesting number for people who are into tarot and so forth. I'm not much of a tarot practitioner, so that was the chance number that came up. And, they all said, we want to throw in on this. And so then that was part of the myth that then came about. But yeah, so if Polydeukion followed you back, that's very interesting. If it was one of the tetrad group, would it have been Pan-Eros?
It could have been. Although, if it was Polydeukion, that would be kind of interesting considering I am an ally myself.
Right.
It could have been Pan-Eros too. I'm not entirely sure. And because I don't remember, it was a while back, and it just kind of like that memory popped up because I'm talking to you.
Sure.
But I do remember, they were really talking to people, and it was kind of, the conversation kind of went like, what are people's problem? Why are they getting all worked up about and getting hung up on this gender thing? I don't understand.
Yeah. And that's part of something that I think is really important for them to teach, because on the one hand, people of various different non-typical gender identities want to have deities that reflect that, and that's important, and that's good, and that's fine. That's kind of the thing that in other contexts might be called coming out theology, that the deities are okay with this, and if they exemplify it, then of course they're definitely okay with it. But in the case of each of them, they have also conveyed the message that they don't just want to be the deities for trans and gender variant people. That they're not one-trick ponies, in other words. And that's a message that I think gets lost too much, because straight people straight cisgendered people can benefit from interacting with them just as much as anyone. And this kind of notion that, well, you can only really usefully interact with a deity that's your own gender and sexuality. Well, maybe not.
Yeah. I mean, for me, even, I interact with many male deities, male identified deities.
Yeah.
And, they haven't had a problem with me having female bits, and liking my female bits. So it's like, and it's really funny. And, you mentioned this about their views on, us being hung up on gender, and how, and how that came out through me, when One Followed Me Home, is that I've asked other deities as well. And, whether they're gendered or multi-gendered or above gender or whatever. And they all say the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It is kind of a weird human problem in many respects. And I think it says a lot that there is the need for it and the desire for it and the attention to it. But it also, it's one of those things that is fascinating because of what it tells you about people's motivations and all of that. But it's also fascinating that it's such a limited and kind of myopic thing. If we're dealing with deities, well, that's just pretty cool. I mean, deities, they're huge, they're big, they're interesting, they're powerful, they're wise, all of that kind of stuff. They're beyond the usual realm of experience. They're beyond our ability to comprehend. And the thing that you want to focus on is gender. It's almost like saying, I'm gonna give a workshop at the next Pantheacon about deities who wear green cloaks.
Right.
And we need to really build a movement around deities who wear green cloaks and make a list of deities who wear green cloaks. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's likely that you probably wouldn't see green on certain deities.
Mm-hmm.
You might not see cloaks on certain deities, but I suspect that any of them, given the chance, would probably go, hey, look, nice green cloak. Cool.
Right. Exactly.
If it was a green cloak party or whatever. Right. So that, it's one of these weird things that we are, and it's something I do notice, I have to admit, just in day-to-day interactions with people, how quickly and kind of assertively and necessarily they want to make statements about gender at the drop of a hat. I think it demonstrates how very, very insecure American society in particular is with the entire concept of gender. And so I think that, there's material there to be examined and thought about. And I think that many of these deities can help us with that, but it's also important to realize that that's not the only reason they're here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. And it was interesting that you mentioned that, they're not just for transgender people, because I remember hearing some of the argument when we first doing our work that, it's like, well, why don't transgender people go and do their own thing?
Right.
And I'm like, but, if you're saying that, the goddess or the gods or whatever are for everybody.
Yeah.
Or if if you have a particular group, like if it's all men, all women or whatever, and you're saying that the gods are for them, for everybody, then, why not include people in your group? Why not include the different, the other?
Yeah. That's one of the motivating factors, I think, in a lot of the work that I've done with the Ekklesía, that, queer is the first descriptor in kind of our group's list of descriptive terms. But the thing about it is that it's queer not just in the gender or sexuality sense. It's queer first and foremost in many, many, many other ways, in the way that it questions boundaries between cultures, boundaries between theologies, languages, classes of divine being, humans and deities, humans and heroes, all of these different things, and also gender and sexuality. It's something that queries and questions all of those. But it's also, I think, there's a way in which making the dearly beloved Reverend Hyperion did talk about this with the Unnamed Path as well, that, even though their group was specifically, as they described it, for men who love men, they would also do things to serve the wider community. Shamans aren't shamans for other shamans. They're shamans for the wider community. And so that's been an important part of the Ekklesía Antínoou, that we are a queer group. Our basis is in queer things. We, one of the really only true requirements that we have is that queerness is respected. If someone is transphobic, homophobic, biphobic, anything like that, they're not going to get along well in our group. It isn't as if any of these things are forced in people's faces or anything like that. It's just that those attitudes aren't really conducive to our community. And I don't think they're conducive to human community in general. So we wouldn't allow that. But we are so queer that we even allow people in who aren't queer. And I think that really ought to be a notion that's not as weird and radical as it is. And yet a lot of groups, I think, do just get so hung up on we're different, we're special, we're queer, that they forget that there's a much bigger, wider world out there that we have to deal with. And if to an extent, if people are using our group and interacting with us as a kind of training ground to get comfortable with some of these concepts in a spiritual context, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, as long as they're not being disrespectful or anything like that to our traditions or to the people involved. So, yeah, I mean, it's something that I think needs to happen more, that the specialized groups open up and offer something to the wider community, if not embracing as much of that wider community as possible in what they already do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what we try to do a lot in our own coven. And, and trying to teach.
Succeed brilliantly from what I can tell.
Oh, thank you. Because we're really about radical inclusion and making sure that happens.
Yeah.
But I think some of my listeners are probably going to think I'm a kind of a broken record about this, but one of the problems I feel about the pagan community in a general sense is the isolationism, and the closedness, where, people aren't thinking about the greater human community. They may do public stuff in the pagan community, but it's, the greater human community that a lot of groups seem to fall short of. They somebody had to find, you're a priest for everybody, for the people that come to you, not just those in your own circle. And, I truly believe that, but it just doesn't seem like, as much as we're getting bigger, it doesn't seem like the pagan community's kind of caught up with that yet.
Yeah, I do think that is a problem. And one of the places that I've been very pleased to see minor progress on that, and this is what we're talking about with a small group of people, like less than 10 people, is in the Pagan Student Union at the college I work at. We are in a very relatively remote rural location. It's a very, very, very conservative town that our college is in. And the Pagan Student Union kind of was started because I experienced harassment from a supervisor over religious issues. And in the mediations and so forth after that, I had been thinking that a Pagan Student Union would be a good thing to have there anyway. I certainly knew a number of pagan students. And they said, what do you think would be a good solution for the hostile work environment that you have perceived here? And I said, I think a Pagan Student Union would go a long way in saying that, we're doing something to lessen at least the feeling that exists. It hasn't made that feeling go away. There are pagan colleagues that I have on the staff who still don't feel they can be public about their identity for fear of loss of job and things like that. But it is a group that exists. It exists primarily as a social group. And several of the members and two of our past presidents have been non-pagan. And they are there to learn. They find it very interesting. They generally come from some religious background or other, but aren't currently practicing anything. But they're there because they like the people, they like what we do, and they find it interesting. And even just providing that small bit of information and outreach to the community, I think is really, really valuable. And, like I said, we're talking about less than 10 people in a small rural community here, but the fact that we even exist in that community is in its own way kind of a triumph. There are no public pagan groups in that area. I think there are a few online lists and Facebook groups and things like that, but did they ever meet in person? I haven't heard of them doing so. So, even just something small like that can have a profound effect. If as a result of being affiliated with that group, 5 people who graduate from that college in the next 5 years have a better understanding of paganism but aren't pagan themselves and can challenge somebody in the future who says, oh, those ridiculous pagans, they're just a bunch of Satanists or whatever, I think that's a good thing. I think that's useful.
Well, I think you're right. It's learning the people's stories, and putting a face to something that you may not understand.
Yes. And, and that's one of the things that I think is just important to my entire spiritual life and my approach in everything I do, is that it is all about the stories. Not only about myths of deities and heroes and things like that, but also the people that are in the community. What brought them to this point in their life? What influences did they have that moved them in this direction or that direction towards becoming what they are now? I always find that very, very interesting. And I also find that if people don't share those stories freely and willingly, because, there are a lot of people who will just tell a story at the drop of a hat and make their 5-minute trip to the corner store into a 3-hour saga and, and all that kind of thing. And that's great and that's fun. Mm-hmm. But then there are a number of people who I've known for many years who I kind of feel like I don't know them any better. And, there's all different types of people who are shy and so forth, but there's always the story to be discovered. There's always the stories that we know once existed that are now lost. Mm-hmm. And I kind of feel like there's a large amount of that in our community these days, that there are stories that are there that people aren't telling about their lives and so forth. And those are just as important to know, I think, in building our communities as the shared stories and traditions of gods and heroes and the exemplary people of our particular traditions.
Well, that's part of my ministry with This Week in Heresy.
Yes.
Is to tell stories because, sure, I've been interviewing some semi-famous people and well-known people, but I also like to interview people that aren't well-known.
Right.
And, to hear their spiritual journey and their spiritual story. Because, I really think that having a face to a story, having a face to someone who is different, who you may have thought of as something weird or bizarre or oh my God, you can't escape the humanity of that.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way to put it, I think. And yeah, there there's something about, I think, making all sorts of things more human and more embodied that just needs to be done in general in our culture. It, you know, as much as we hate to point to things like this, the existence of will and grace in the late 90s and early 2000s is probably the reason that efforts to get gay marriage legalized succeeded in the 2005 period onward, because it humanized rather than kind of minstrelized gay people.
Right.
And so the more kind of, no matter how much we might groan and criticize and so forth, some of the media portrayals, some of the films, television, all these different kinds of things, if they go any distance toward putting the human face on the issue, then it's so much better. This is going to be an uphill battle for those of us who are of non-binary gender identities, because until there's characters that aren't jokes on television or in movies or whatever, to my knowledge, I don't think there are any or have been any. There have maybe been little hints at them, but no actual fully embodied character who comes onto the screen and says a word. And so, that when that happens, hopefully in the next 10 or 15 years, I would think, then we'll know that we've made some progress, and that further progress will then be made because of it. The number of movies about trans people, and then the increasing number of actual trans people playing trans characters, is something that I think is going to be really helpful. Hopefully sooner rather than later. But so I think that's the next logical step, and we are moving in that direction, and so that's a good thing. But then also it would be great to have actual pagan characters on television who aren't the witches from Charmed or Buffy, as much as they're wonderful and fun. Something that me and a bunch of my pagan friends said when we would watch Buffy is, gosh, we really wish we had their special effects budget for rituals, but most of it just isn't that interesting,
Right.
or at least not visibly so. And, and then in the one episode of Buffy where Willow went to the Wicca group at the college, then she comes away saying, "Oh, they're all just a bunch of wanna blessed bees," right. and they're all talking about the environment and having a bake sale and things like that. And that could have been a greatly teachable moment. But it kind of turned into a joke of, well, that's not really the real witchcraft. The real witchcraft is this stuff with all the special effects and the bulgy veins and the black eyes and everything. And no, actually, that other stuff is the real witchcraft.
Right.
It's the real pagan community. And they have to love us, bake sales and all.
Yeah, I always tell people, like if I could wiggle my nose and clean my house, that would be the best thing ever.
Yes.
It would be awesome.
Yeah.
But you're right, that's not what witchcraft is. And it's not what the magic and depending on which group you're working with, that's not, some of it's really boring. Some of it's kind of chemistry, because I do a lot of herbal stuff myself. And
right.
So,
yeah. And I mean, for myself, I don't do a lot of what many people would consider magic. Most of what I do would fall into the category, and I hate to use this term because I think it's kind of needlessly, let's say, judgmental. The whole idea of high magic.
Right.
You know, I mean, or to you know, give it the Greek term hiera magica. You know, basically, in their minds, that, you know, definition of high magic is basically Egyptian religion,
Right.
Calling on gods and things like that. And so that's kind of my main magical realm that I delve into and occasionally dwell in. And to people who are not interested in those things and who just want to see the special effects and the winning lottery numbers and all of that kind of stuff, well, that's just not going to seem like magic at all to them. And yet I think that that's the stuff where the real ecstatic experiences happen, the real transformative things. It's not that doesn't happen in other forms of magic as well, or in quote unquote low magic. But the kind of demand, I suppose, in our overly positivist, materialist culture of results-based magic, right? That there's something to be understood and learned and observed from that, but there's also a kind of trap there, you know. The only recent example of that I can think of from my life actually involved PantheaCon a couple of years ago. I carry a small pocket knife that belonged to my grandfather as a reminder of my ancestors. And I often have need of it to cut something or whatever, use one of the other tools on it for some purpose or other. And I know that my grandpa would be very happy that I am using his knife to do these things to help me in my daily life. And I was about to go through security at San Jose Airport after PantheaCon, and I realized, I didn't put that pocket knife in my checked luggage. And the only possibilities were going to be it's found and confiscated, or somehow I get it past them.
Right.
And so I thought, all right. And I was in the security line at that point and was about 50 feet from the checkpoint through the little, you know, mouse maze thing that they have.
Yeah.
And I thought, all right, what am I going to do? And I had started working with the Ephesia Grammata at that point, and I went, well, wait a minute, the Ephesia Grammata are protective. I'm going to use them for that. And so I chanted my Ephesia Grammata and did some gestures around it and so forth. I put it into one of my carry-on bags that was going to go through the metal detector, or rather through the X-ray. And then I went through, and they searched my other bag.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't even open the zipper on that bag. And I thought, okay, well, guess what? That worked.
Right.
You know, because, yeah, I mean, it's something that I would not part with willingly. And I was considering, you know, going back and checking it as an individual item if they made me do that. And then possibly having to miss my plane if that was the case. You know, and a lot of people would say, well, it's just a pocket knife, but you don't understand. It's my grandfather's pocket.
Right.
You know, it may be very pedestrian, but it's one of the only heirlooms from him that I have. So yeah, I mean, that kind of a thing, but that sort of results-based magic that people would in the general culture regard as magic. It's not a good or a bad thing, but I think just getting into the mindset that you're not a real magician unless you can do stuff like that, kind of ends up turning into, what you get with a lot of geek communities of, oh, well, I can do this video game, that, I mean, there was a very geeky woman I knew back in Ireland who said to me that she could finish, the usual Windows desktop solitaire game in 22 seconds.
Wow.
And I said, well, at my fastest, I've done it at 45 seconds. How did you manage to do it in 22 seconds? And she said, well, I was using a voice-operated mouse. And I thought to myself, I really doubt that. It turned into one of those geeky pissing contests. And I think there is a tendency among some magic workers, because it is a form of geekdom, I think, ultimately. Well, anything can be, but that seems to be one. The geeks of the pagan and occult community tend to be ceremonial magicians, a lot of them.
Yeah, I know some.
Yes. And, all the good and the bad of that. But, the way that it turns into this kind of pissing contest of, oh, well, I'm a real mage because I have, done this, that, or the other kind of a thing. That, I don't know. It's, how did we get on this topic again? We're rambling all over the place.
Yeah, well, the conversations tend to go this way. But,
Yes.
I was just thinking, that's kind of, happens on the witchy side of the street too, like,
Yes.
I'm a real witch because I was initiated by a lady, blah, 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 in the third order of blah, 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 and
my grandmother was burned 6 times at stake, and yours was only burned twice.
Right. Because she liked it because it tickled,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think it kind of comes around to actually even the idea of gender, this kind of like pissing contest thing. Because, people seem to think, I mean, I know I've seen it a lot in the Brit trads because, I'm from the East Coast and it's a little more heavily Brit trad on the East Coast. And it's like, your witchcraft has to be a certain way. And, how many steps away are you from Laurie Bruno or Laurie Cabot?
Right.
It's kind of like, really, people, magic is a tool and it's a very good tool and it can do lots of interesting things. But how you do it is up to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, if you do it differently, like, I'm sure you have many different magical talents than I do, and
right.
My wife has way different magical talents than I do.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There is a thing there that I think is interesting and important as well, that people, I think, do want to feel that they are a part of a lineage tradition.
Right.
And I think that there is great value to be had in that, but it's the difference between having a lineage tradition that means something and having a lineage tradition that is then just another little scout badge of honor on your sash to show off to people and kind of name drop over.
Right. Absolutely.
And that, and I do have to admit that I think the wider pagan community, we are awful name droppers. But one of the reasons that we can be is because it's such a small community. I never would have dreamed back in, 2003, 2004, when I first picked up Christopher Penczak's gay witchcraft book, that I would eventually meet him and have conversations with him, and that has happened with pagan author after pagan author that I've read. It usually all happens at Pantheacon.
Right.
But, it's happened in other places as well, in other contexts. And, the way that our community is small and accessible in that way, I think is a really, really good thing. But then when you meet people and you talk with them and they tell you, oh, well, I was at a workshop with so-and-so and I, was just at the book launch of this person and that person and the other person and so on. There does come that point where it's just name dropping for name dropping's sake, as opposed to I was taught by this person and therefore I'm in the lineage tradition of them. Mm-hmm. And that means something because it means I'm part of this wider current. I'm part of this wider community. So, I do think that there is something useful there with being interested in lineage, but it can just turn into that, Pokemon collect them all kind of thing as well.
Right. And I think here runs the danger too, is that we forget the humanity.
Yes.
Behind the people.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of brings it around to knowing people's stories.
Right.
And remembering that, the leaders are human.
Yes.
I also go to a, my bishop calls it Methodist Church. It's primarily African-American church. And,
right.
Bishop Yvette Flunder is the leader. And
mm-hmm.
she talks a lot about, she talks a lot about herself and her own fallibility.
Yeah.
And, and I think that's where we forget about people sometimes.
Yeah.
Not only, hearing people's stories, putting a human face on the other, but also forgetting that the people that are doing the leadership are also human and fallible, and they're going to disappoint you sometimes.
Yes. And that's something that has been important for me, at least in my blogging. There is a tag on there of failure.
Yeah.
And when I have a hardcore ritual fail, personal practice fail, spiritual fail, whatever, I tend to blog about it because I think it's important to get out there that, hey, I have just as many screw ups as anybody else. But also, the best thing you can do with failure, there was a quote that I heard many years ago, and I don't know who said it originally, but a fool learns from their own mistakes. A wise person learns from the mistakes of others.
Right.
And so, I feel it's kind of my duty as the designated fool sometimes to share my mistakes and go, okay, this shouldn't happen to you in the future because now and knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe.
Right.
Right. And I think, that kind of thing is good because we do. People do put, the pagan leaders and authors and teachers and so forth on a pedestal. And when they don't fail to be 100% wonderful, wise, brilliant, approachable, friendly, courteous, full of life, inspiring, and, just overflowing with enthusiasm, and then people are let down by that. Well, maybe it was just a bad day. Aren't we allowed to have bad days? And this is something that has kind of come up as far as issues within my own community recently. There was a particular individual who said to me, when I met you at Pantheacon, you weren't happy, you were grumpy, and you didn't seem to be full of life at all. And that just completely put me off and all of this kind of thing. And it's like, well, I was getting ready for a ritual. I was having to carry everything from one of the outlying hotels to the DoubleTree on my own. I was asking you guys for help and you were refusing to give it to me. I think I probably had a little bit of reason to be grumpy in that situation.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I'm going to be upset when things that could go better don't go better. Mm-hmm. And especially I'm going to be upset if people who are supposed to help and who are supposed to be the the lineage holders and upholders of a tradition and so forth kind of go, nah, I'm not really interested today. Mm-hmm. There's certainly good reasons for, not coming to a ritual or being available to help or things like that. But if the whole reason is, well, I just don't like your attitude right now, hang on a minute. We really are human here. And, the same people in other situations would go, oh, do you need a hug? Mm-hmm. But because in that particular moment, it was that situation and not another, they had no, I don't think, any appreciation or compassion for the reality of the situation. And so, these kind of things do happen. And I am guilty of having harshly judged people for similar reasons. So I know that this is something that I'm not by any means free of. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's the more that I get to know some of the quote unquote big name pagans on a more personal basis, and the more I see some of their flaws and things, the more human that makes them, and the more compassionate it makes me. Mm-hmm. I think. And this is one of these things about deities as well. And I suppose this is where Antinous really comes in quite beautifully. I mean, he was very definitely human. He was very definitely flawed. One of the main myths concerning him is about a lion hunt that he and Hadrian did in the year before he died. And it was an out-and-out failure. They did manage to kill the lion, but it almost killed Antinous in the process because he was a rambunctious kid who thought he could do it on his own. And we have a whole festival yearly around that that focuses on failure and kind of says, okay, look, everyone fails. The gods fail sometimes. Mm-hmm. And this is a thing that happens, but the important thing isn't to say, oh, it wasn't really a failure. It was just a lesson that you needed to learn or whatever. You don't get to learn the lesson until you actually admit it's an honest failure, right? An honest, and this is something I teach my students in my college classes as well. They get their first paper back from me and they get a D on it or something. And they say, can I redo this? And I say, no, because by redoing it, you're not learning anything. You know what you did wrong in this now, and then doing a do-over of it doesn't teach you anything. I want you to go on and do better the next time. Mm-hmm. An honest failure and getting a D on a paper is better than a false A that you got because then you got to make, fix your spelling mistakes and so forth. Right. Yeah. And I think that's true in spiritual life as well. People are very, very, very unwilling to admit to failure. And if you do admit to it, then there is a way to then learn something from it. But if you go, oh, no, it wasn't a failure. Oh, no, that's, this is all just good data for our experiments and so forth. Yeah, that may be true, but you do have to go, hey, and we didn't quite do it right. Mm-hmm. And not be afraid to say that, not be afraid to be fallible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, I agree. And I think that's regardless of what tradition you are in.
Yes.
Because, there are times where I'm in a circle and it just falls flat. There are times where I'm at church and I'm just like, I am not feeling this.
Yeah.
And, and it's not only my own failure in that sense, because I'm just either not with it today or tired or whatever. But, we always teach that, the gods have the capability to fail as well.
Yes.
And, they're not all, we tend to say, we tend to teach that the gods are, well, I mean, I guess you could call it amoral, but, right. They have personalities, they do things. Yeah. And, and it's not always exactly what you think it's going to be. You
right.
may have an idea of what Hecate can do, but your relationship between you and Hecate is going to be different than Joe Schmo's relationship with Hecate down the street.
Yes.
And it's not always going to work exactly like Joe Schmo does, Right.
Right. And one of my favorite stories in this regard is the story of Hermes' birth and kind of his invention of sacrifice and various other things when he steals Apollon's cattle. And one of my favorite parts of the story is that then when he is pretty much brought before Zeus and accused of this crime, and he tries to talk his way out of it. And what eventually happens is Apollon takes him on his shoulder, and then Hermes farts on his shoulder. and then pretty much all the gods just laugh, and then it's like, oh, it's all right. And now Hermes, you get to be one of the Olympians, right?
Mm-hmm.
He blatantly lied in front of all of them, and everyone knew it and probably wasn't that happy with it. And a well-placed fart turned the whole thing around,
right?
And is the reason why Hermes is, such a well-regarded god now. He wouldn't be that if he weren't counted amongst the Olympians, mm-hmm. right? And while I wouldn't say that the fart is the only reason that he got that, nonetheless, it's just this thing that is totally unexpected mm-hmm. that happened in the situation, and it's a very Hermes thing to, just that bizarre, unexpected moment that then happens, and then everyone just kind of deals with it, and that's, oftentimes very interesting things come out of that. Mm-hmm. Hermes has certainly, over the years, done a lot of different things that then make me go, oh, okay, well, that makes me realize something about that. Mm-hmm. If you give something to Hermes to hold, don't ever expect that he's going to give it back without difficulty.
Right.
For example. There's all kinds of little ins and outs like that, but those completely unexpected moments that just kind of come out of nowhere, and I think there's quite a bit to be learned in those, and appreciating those moments when they happen, particularly in situations where it seems like there's failure or complete faux pas or whatever. In no matter what situation it might be in your life, but also really religiously as well.
Well, speaking of the unexpected, we're just about out of time, but I know you're going to be at PantheaCon this weekend.
Yes, I am.
And so why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing, or at least the brief versions about what you're doing this weekend?
So I've got two major things on the main program. On Saturday night at 9:00, I'm going to be running a session called Teenage Gods and Heroes. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be part information, part discussion, and part ritual. It's mainly intended for younger people, so teenagers, hopefully. If adults come, that's fine, but the focus is going to be on whichever teenagers are there. Mm-hmm. There will be adult members of the Ekklesía Antínoou there helping as well. So that's that. It's one of the only younger people focused programs in the entire set of offerings at PantheaCon this year. Mm-hmm. So that should be very interesting. I have no idea how that's going to go, and it's all going to depend on who turns up. The other event on the main program is 3:30 in the afternoon on Sunday. It's our Lupercalia and Parentalia ritual, or I should probably say Lupercalia and Parentalia. But, people use both pronunciations. That's our usual one. Absolutely everyone is invited to that. So it's our version of the ancient Roman Lupercalia ritual. And then also Parentalia is honoring the ancestors. And then the other one that I'm very, very excited about is not on the main program, and it's going to be a roving hero and heroine cultus ritual that's going to take place between 4 hospitality suites on Friday night, starting just a little bit before 9. And it's going to honor 4 different heroes and heroines who I think have relevance to a lot of modern issues. So they're going to be honored, and then they're also going to be prayed to for particular things that are going on. One of them, for example, is Memnon, who was one of the heroes of the Trojan War. He was Ethiopian, and he was one of the last people that Achilles killed in single combat. He was, universally regarded as being an Ethiopian king, although there are some traditions that said he was maybe a Persian king, but in any case, non-European. And he has become very, very important in my life over the last few years. He is connected into the Antinoan cultus in various ways, but with the epidemic of police violence against people of color in the United States, Memnon, I think, has something important to contribute to that in various different ways, and something that might be useful for people to look at and understand. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. The 4 heroes and heroines that will be honored are Antinoo, the foundress of Mantinea, Memnon, Boudica, and then also finally Cuchulainn.
Oh, wow.
And there's information on my blog about that, and it will begin in the Hexenfest hospitality suite a little bit before 9:00 on Friday night.
Oh, wow.
And then I'll be in a bunch of other things. I am on a few panels that are both on and off the program, and I'm planning on attending lots of things. And I'm looking forward to the discussion that you and Michelle will be having as well.
Thank you.
So I'll definitely be at that.
Yep, that's Sunday at 1:30.
Yes, indeed.
That sounds really fantastic, and I'm actually I'll be curious to see the 4 suite thing. I think that would be really neat.
I think I did propose it for the main program. It was just going to be stationary, but it's not being accepted on the main program, and then kind of saying we really need to do this. How can we do this in an interesting way? I don't think there's enough processions.
Yeah.
And so, there's going to be 3 processions basically involved in between the different parts of it, and having a bunch of people chanting to different deities, carrying banners to the different hospitality suites, I think is going to be wonderful in so many different ways.
That's going to be fun. I think that, this weekend is always an amazing time, and, anything and everything can happen, and it's always fascinating stuff going on. So I think this is going to be one of those things that is just going to be amazing. Yeah.
Well, I hope so. And if it's a horrific, disastrous failure, well, then we will have learned something.
Yep. And, like we're saying, you'll learn from it and try something different the next time around.
Exactly. Yep.
So, if people would like to get in touch with you outside of PantheaCon, where can they go?
The easiest place would be my blog, which is Ekklesía Antínoou, and that's AEDICULAANTINOI.wordpress.com. Mm-hmm. You can also email me that same title, Ekklesía Antínoou, at hotmail.com. And I also write the Speaking of Syncretism column on polytheist.com. So those are all three places. I don't do Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, or anything like that, but through those other means, I'm very accessible.
Well, we'll have all that in the show notes so people can click on it. And so thank you so much for being here.
Yes, and thank you for doing this. I'm really enjoying listening to your back catalog, and I think this is a wonderful further piece of work that you're doing. Everything that I have seen you, your wife, and your group do has just been wonderful. And particularly the book that you produced a couple of years ago after Gender Kerfluffle 2.0 or whatever it was.
Right. Gender and Transgender and Modern Paganism is the name of it.
Exactly. Yes. That wonderful book, which I highly recommend everyone go out and obtain and read and enjoy.
Well, there's a free PDF on our star.org website, st4r.org, which is our new 2.0 website.
Yeah, so now they have no excuse not to read it.
That's right. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This has been a wonderful way to end my days. This is fantastic.
Awesome. I'd like to thank Lupus for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can support This Week in Heresy by subscribing to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, following us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast, or financially through Patreon. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.